Yeah, that's right. 75, I should have. 72.
Ladies and gentlemen, good citizens all, welcome to Meet the Candidates and to Coburg Uniting Church. I'm Reverend Ron Rosinski, minister of this church. There are more people living under authoritarian governments and fewer people living under democratic governments in the world now than there were 5 years ago. So your presence here tonight is very important as part of building a strong democracy. So thank you for being here. We begin with our acknowledgement of country. We acknowledge that the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, and we pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Sovereignty was never ceded, always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Some housekeeping matters very quickly. The toilets are to my right, to your left, just through the door there. The men's toilet is the far toilet. The women's toilet is to your immediate left as you go through the door. Fire exits, you go out the way you came in, just through there. The gate to our Coburg Common is locked, so we ask you to exit the way you came in, please, for fire exits. We will be inviting you, we do invite you, to join us for coffee and tea at the close of tonight's conversation. So we hope you can stay for a while. We also welcome current state member for Brunswick, Tim Reid, and former mayor of Moreland, Natalie Aboud. A very warm welcome to you both. And I hope you join with me in doing something countercultural, either throw it in the toilet, or perhaps less radical, turn it off, or a buzzer, if you please. There's nothing worse than pouring your heart out, or trying to listen to someone and their phone rings and they have to take the call. So if you could please put your phones to silent. Our moderator for tonight's Meet the Candidate debate at this auspicious time in history is Anna Crabb, and she is the CEO of Australia Energy Foundation. Would you believe it? It was founded right here in the City of Moreland. And would you please warmly welcome Anna Crabb.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you all for being here this evening. I'm not sure if I'm in camera shot, We've got many of you joining us in person, which is such a delight to be together in the one space. For those of you standing at the back, your legs might be getting a bit tired as we get on in the evening. Please feel free to take one of these nicely socially distanced seats at the front. You're very welcome to join us at the front here. As Ron said, I am the CEO of the Australian Energy Foundation. AEF has a proud legacy as being birthed, as Ron said, just down the road in Brunswick by a group of committed locals, probably people like yourselves, who really wanted to make sure that their neighbours had access to clean, reliable, affordable energy. And we continue that legacy today. And so what we do at AEF is really help people to take practical action on climate change. You might have seen my colleagues in the hallway as we come in. Great thing about being a Moreland resident is you get access to our free energy advice service. So if you're fired up to take practical climate action tonight, please do get in touch with us. Also important, of course, is to make sure that our policies and our regulations enable the action that we'd all like to see taken. And that's why I'm here tonight for this very special forum. I do want to just also acknowledge the organisers of this event. Thank you to the Neighbours United for Climate Action Moreland, the Coburg Uniting Church, and also for the delightful solicitors for serenading us before we got started today. Thank you very much for that special touch. Well done. Thank you.
Thank you, John Englart.
Thank you, John, as well. And we do have many friends joining us online via Facebook as well. So addressing climate change is a top priority for people living in Wills, who I'll refer to you as Willsians for simplicity's sake. So you might have seen the results of Australia's biggest poll on climate for 2022. The results for Wills were quite amazing. Close to 4 in every 5 Willsian believe greater climate action on climate change will strengthen the Australian economy. A similar number believe the benefits received from greater action on climate change will outweigh any costs involved. And more than 2 in every 3 Willsian believe that greater action on climate change would be good for people's health. That's pretty amazing, those results, and not dissimilar from other places around the country. And that's probably why you're right here, to ask these wonderful candidates here about what they're doing in these areas. So the organisers have invited all of the candidates running in this upcoming federal election in the City of Wills to attend this evening. We're honoured with the presence of 5 of your candidates today. So in order, they are Emma Black from the Victorian Socialists, Sue Bolton from the Socialist Alliance, Leah Horsefall from Animal Justice Party, Sarah Jefford from the Australian Greens, and the current sitting member, the Honourable Peter Khalil, MP from the Australian Labor Party. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for showing up. This is a really important part of democracy in action. Thank you for being here and taking questions from the audience this evening. We do have a couple of apologies. Thomas Wright of the Liberals, Michael Al-Hajja, when he was the candidate, declined to attend, has now been replaced by Irene Zivkovic, who couldn't make it this evening. We did not receive a response from the candidates for Pauline Hanson's One Nation Party nor the Australian Federation Party, but important to know that those candidates were all invited to attend the event this evening. So, how is this going to work? You'll have the opportunity first off to hear from each of our candidates. They'll be given 4 minutes to answer a few questions that the organisers have put to them. So these questions are, away from politics, for you as a human being, what does a climate emergency mean to you? What are your top 3 priorities for addressing the climate crisis that you will push for in your party? And how will you stay connected with and engage with the people of Wills on climate issues and concerns? So each of the candidates will get a reminder at 3 minutes, a little warning tinkle bell, and then 4 minutes they'll be asked to wrap up with a bigger bell. We have Celia in the background here taking care of our timekeeping. Thank you, Celia. We'll then move on to questions from the community. We've received many questions before this evening, and the organisers, they're already here, and others have worked hard to go through those questions, collate them together, and I will be putting those questions to our candidates this evening. We ask that this evening is an evening of respect and civility, so we're here really to listen to the candidates, so we will ask you to really just be quiet while people are responding. You're welcome to show your support via some non-verbal cues, some twinkle hands or something like that to show your support if you wish, but we ask to keep any interruptions or applause to when the candidates have concluded speaking. Climate change is a very emotional topic, and we understand that people may get emotional during this evening. We have a couple of support people in the audience tonight who can have a cuppa with you and a little chat if you so need to. So Maggie and Trevor. Maggie, if you put your hand up, and Trevor. Thank you, Trevor, at the back there. If you just want to take a little bit of a breather, feel free to step outside to where Ron is standing now, and Maggie and Trevor can have a little chat with you. And last note, the organisers wanted to share that the organisers of this forum accept that the scientific evidence of human-caused climate change. This is not the forum for questioning climate science. Thank you very much. So now let's move on to our opening remarks from our candidates. We have first up, please, Emma Black.
Can everyone hear me? Well, yeah, thank you, everyone. I want to acknowledge that we're meeting on stolen land as well. I'm sure people know this is the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And as a climate activist and a socialist, I've always stood in solidarity with Indigenous struggles against mining billionaires and their government backers. And I think that's a really important part of addressing the climate question in this country. So yeah, climate change is the #1 issue on people's minds in this election, not that you'd know it from the campaign coverage so far. So a big thanks to the organisers for, holding us all accountable on this question. I think candidates should be accountable to people, not to profits and corporate donations and things like that. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a teacher, I'm a trade unionist and a climate activist. My 15 minutes of fame were like getting beaten by Victoria police while peacefully protesting outside the International Mining and Resources Conference in 2019, which is basically speed dating for the worst climate vandals in the world. Sue was there. I'm also a socialist, which means that for me, I see climate change as a class issue. Sorry, I just lost my thing. I see climate change as a class issue. I think the capitalist system, it has a logic that means that people are compelled to maximise their profits at all costs, even if it means destroying the entire basis of human existence, which can seem a bit crazy, but hey, it's a crazy society. I've been asked to talk about what the climate emergency means to me away from politics as a human being. But for me, being human is inseparable from politics. I think our capacity to work together to transform ourselves and our environment to meet our collective needs as human beings is what distinguishes us from other animals. And the problem is, under capitalism, politics becomes basically a technocratic contest between, over who gets to manage the economy. And I think in this situation, ordinary people feel really powerless to intervene and take control over, important questions within their society. So for me, politics, is an essential part of being human, because it's about empowering us to actually, exercise our human capacities to collectively work together, to produce things in our own interests. And as a socialist, yeah, politics for me is about empowering people, not about, managing the economy on their behalf. The three things that are absolutely necessary for me in order to address climate change is an immediate ban on all new coal and gas projects and a zero emissions economy by 2035. I think we need public ownership and democratic control over the energy sector in order to effectively start shutting it down. And in order to fund a rapid expansion of renewables, we need to massively increase taxes on the obscenely rich. We don't need to give out tax cuts to people, and we shouldn't support new coal mines. Restructuring human society, is not just about winning the balance of power in Parliament. It's about empowering ordinary people in their workplaces and in their unions, and that's something I do every day, and I will continue doing, no matter what happens in this election.
Thank you very much, Emma. Thank you. And here's Sue Bolton. Thank you.
Hi, okay, I'll start as soon as the mic stops swinging. Okay, only got 4 minutes. I'd like to start by acknowledging that we're sitting and standing on stolen land, the land of the Rotary Warrior land that was stolen and never ceded. The climate emergency means that parts of Australia have such high temperatures that they're becoming unlivable, with parts of the Pilbara reaching 50 plus degrees, and people are facing the threat of being forced to move away from these areas, and some people in the Aboriginal community were forced to COVID isolate in these conditions with substandard housing. If you think you're prepared for extreme heat waves with air conditioning, then think again. There's always blackouts. That's what happened in Melbourne in 2014. So all the air conditioning in the world couldn't compensate for the blackouts. Then there's the prospect of terrifying bushfires, which are unfightable now, and so extreme that they created whole weather systems and mini tornadoes that lifted up fire trucks, picked them up and threw them on the ground, resulting in the death of firefighters in the 2019-2020 season. Then we've got the prospects of whole communities needing to be relocated because of flooding, such as we've seen in Lismore. But how many times can you lose your house? But also, a lot of people are stuck. If you don't have much money, if you're rich, you can easily afford somewhere else. If you're poor, you're stuck there in South Lismore. And similar situation for people in the Torres Strait Islands. So climate change is already affecting every aspect of our lives, but not all people recognise it's climate change causing things. Even summer sports might be forced to get to change. They might not be able to continue in summer. And climate change is partly responsible for the skyrocketing cost of living that we're experiencing, which has pushed 6 countries in the world into famine. Top priorities for me and Socialist Alliance include: we need to urgently get off fossil fuel, both coal and gas, within the next 5 to 10 years and replace it with 100% renewable energy. That means no new coal or gas projects, a ban on fracking and unconventional gas mining, and definitely no Adania mine. But we also need a plan for how to phase out existing fossil fuel projects. We need to urgently prepare this with the involvement of local communities and workers. The energy industry needs to be taken over and run as a public enterprise so that the energy industry is run in the interests of communities, in the environment and workers, not in the interests of profit. That means instead of Elon Musk, I'll skip that bit. And a public energy industry could provide alternative guaranteed jobs for workers in the fossil fuel sector, and that would mean phasing out fossil fuel subsidies, etc. We also need to cut military spending, which is also massively exacerbating climate change. I'll have to skip those other priorities and talk about them in discussion. But I've been involved in a whole range of climate actions in the Moreland Wills area over the years, from starting the campaign in the local area against the East-West link, which we won, through initiating a protest when the councillors slashed the climate budget in 2014, which resulted in them reversing that decision after the protest. I've consistently campaigned to get the Moreland Council off gas, and we've only partially won that fight. It's still to be won fully. I initiated the Upfield Transport Alliance.
Thank you very much, Sue. We now have Leah Horsefall from Animal Justice Party. Thanks, Leah.
Can you hear me okay? Yep, okay, thank you. My name is Leah Horsefall, and I'm very proud to be representing the Animal Justice Party in the City of Wills this election. I live in Brunswick with my partner and our 2 children, and when I'm not running for office, I work on Australia's foreign aid program. I care very deeply about the rights of all sentient beings, so humans but also animals, to be treated with kindness and compassion. So that's why I'm running in this election, to try and be a force for positive change. So the questions, I'll try and get through them quickly. That bell comes quicker than you expect, I think. So away from politics, what does the climate emergency mean to me? So I think it is just simply the greatest challenge that humans have ever faced. It's not just another election issue like health or education or jobs or all of the issues that we care about. They're important, but this is an existential crisis. Our very existence depends on it. So I think it's really in a different category. And on the one hand, I find that absolutely terrifying. It's very scary. But on the other hand, I think it is a huge challenge, and huge challenges can often bring out the best in people. And that's certainly the case for me. I find challenges energising and motivating. They motivate me to act. And I think a lot of other people feel that way too, and the number of us is growing. So I think I'm encouraged by the fact that we outnumber the people who are frozen in the face of this challenge, or worse, are in denial about the scale of the challenge. And we're already using our people power, our consumer power, our voting power to make change. And I'm confident that that change will come. I'm partly confident about that because it simply has to. The alternative doesn't bear thinking about. So that does give me hope that we're going to make a change. So the top 3 priorities for the Animal Justice Party. Before I get to those, I just wanted to talk briefly about one of the main causes of climate change that I don't think gets enough attention in the debate, and that's animal agriculture. There's 2 big ways that animal agriculture contributes to climate change. One through greenhouse gas emissions, including methane, and the other way that it's a terrible cause of climate change is deforestation. And however you define animal agriculture, there's different ways to define it, but however you do, it's one of the biggest causes. So Australia's own submission to the 2018 UNFCCC stated that methane from Australia's 28 million cows and 70 million sheep is going to have a greater impact in the next 20 years on our climate than all of the coal and gas power plants in Australia combined. So it is a huge contributor that we need to focus on, as well as the other contributors. And if we turn our mind to deforestation, so in Queensland alone, in the years between 2012 and 2016, more than 91% of the land that was cleared was for livestock pasture. So if all the reasons that we clear land, the large one is animal agriculture. So I will jump straight to our 3 priorities. So the first one is to declare a climate emergency and develop an action plan to face that climate emergency. That plan would include a target of net zero emissions by 2035, and we would also be pushing very hard for Australia to join the 111 other countries that have committed to the Global Methane Pledge, which is to cut methane emissions by 30% by 2030. The second priority is to remove subsidies and start phasing out the industries of the past that are the most damaging to our climate. So obviously fossil fuels, but also animal agriculture. And the third point is about redirecting support to the industries of the future that are involved with clean energy, plant-based agriculture, and also look to reforest the areas that have already been degraded, and at the same time protect our forest and marine environments that have not yet been degraded. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leah. Sarah Jefford from the Australian Greens.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and can I say what an honour it is to be sitting alongside these passionate and dedicated candidates. It takes a lot to get yourself up here, I know that. I may be a little bit nervous, but I'm sure everybody else has been, so I want to pay respect to that. I acknowledge that we are meeting today on the stolen lands of the Wurundjeri people, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present. I thank them for caring for this country for over 60,000 years, and I stand in solidarity as we hope to continue that legacy into the future. We have been asked to speak about the impact of the climate emergency on our own lives. My life is very privileged. I am white, I went to university, and I'm a lawyer with my own business. I am raising 2 kids in Pascoe Vale, and we don't live in a floodplain or in a bushfire zone. My partner and I are concerned that if we don't take our kids to see the Great Barrier Reef soon, it may be too late. When we talk about climate refugees, we are not talking about people like me. So instead, I would like to talk about the impact on the communities in Central Australia where I grew up. Temperatures are increasing, and climate refugees include First Nations people who have lived on country for 60,000 years. Many First Nations communities will move to Mbachua in Alice Springs because their own communities will be too hot and too dry to remain. Water stress is now impacting most communities in the Northern Territory. I also think about the people in Malakuta that had to flee to the beach to escape the smoke and fire in 2019. And I think about families in Lismore having to climb onto their own roofs and wait to be rescued in the middle of the night only weeks ago. I know that many of us are worried about the impact of climate change on other communities, on the environment and ecosystems, and the futures of those who may not have the loudest voice or deepest pockets in Canberra. We all know how bad Scott Morrison and the Liberal government is on climate change, but being a bit better is not good enough. We need a moratorium on all new coal and gas. There are 114 projects planned with Liberal and Labor support. The only way to tackle the climate emergency is to get off coal and gas. We cannot talk about net zero emissions on the one hand and support new coal and gas projects on the other. We need to tell the truth to coal and gas workers. It is a matter of when, not if, we will end coal and gas consumption. There are opportunities to replace jobs in coal with jobs in renewables. There are investment, employment and export opportunities in meeting the climate emergency head on. We need to stop subsidising fossil fuel industries. Billions of dollars are spent subsidising fossil fuel companies, more than 10 times the amount committed to emergency response funding. Donations to the Labor Party from fossil fuel companies amounted to over $4.5 million in the last decade. How can we expect our decision makers to make the right decisions for us when they are being paid by the companies who profit from our demise? I am not a climate scientist, but I will sit in Parliament with a strong sense of urgency and ambition to tackle the climate emergency, and I want whoever is in government to do more and to do it sooner. I appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight, and thank you to the organisers. As an elected representative, I will listen to the concerns of the electorate. I am committed to being accessible and available to represent the entire electorate. I am not an engineer, I am not a climate scientist. I am someone who wants urgent climate action. And the values that I speak of here are the values that I will take with me into Canberra. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. We'll now have Peter Khalil from the Australian Labor Party.
Thank you, Anna, for emceeing. Thank you, Ron, for hosting. Thank you all of the candidates for coming tonight and all of you for coming out tonight. I want to start too by acknowledging the traditional owners of land and pay my respects to elders past and present. I think something that rings so true in all these opening statements tonight is that everyone up on this stage cares. We all care. We all want the same thing. We want a better world for our kids, for our grandkids, for our community, for our country, for all of humanity. We care, and we know that we face an existential crisis that has not abated during this pandemic. We all want to see the end of climate delinquency. Because over the past 3 years, the past 9 years, we have seen a coalition government with a lack of substance that is breathtaking in its scale. We saw it with the bushfires, we saw it with the slow vaccine rollout, and when it comes to leadership on climate change, forget about it. But caring at the point Australia is at now is not enough. It is only the first step on the journey to solving the climate emergency. We need real action, and it takes a party that can form government to deliver real and meaningful action on climate change. When I was a kid growing up, I saw what governments could do. They could house a new migrant family like mine in public housing. They could provide access to a quality education to house a kid like me, which allowed me to study at university and even make it to federal parliament. And it was Labor governments that protected Antarctica, the ozone layer and Kakadu. These were governments that did things to make Australia and the world better, to leave a legacy. And to me, it's really a slap in the face. I feel actual despair to hear Scott Morrison say, as he did recently, that he doesn't even believe in legacy. Well, what are we elected to do? The Parliament is a place of power, but it should not be power for retaining it for its own sake. It should be power to make a difference. And in a few short weeks, the people will have that power. You will have that power to choose a new government. Labor believes in leaving a legacy. I believe in leaving a legacy for my community and for my country. The fact remains, when it comes to climate, Labor is the only party that can form a government and deliver real action on climate change. One of the questions asked of us tonight was, what are our top 3 priorities? Well, I don't think 3 cut it. If elected, we will achieve 82% renewable energy on the grid by 2030 or better, 43% reduction in emissions by 2030 or better, net zero emissions by 2050 or better, because we will invest in cheaper electric cars, in 10,000 new energy apprenticeships, in a genuine just transition for workers, not just words, with policies that will create over 600,000 new clean energy jobs by 2030, in hundreds of solar community batteries to power 100,000 households. I've already announced 2 for our electorate, one in Brunswick and one in Coburg. In 85 solar banks to plug in renters and low-income households into renewables. We'll host a COP forum with our Pacific Island neighbours and have offshore wind projects that will power millions of homes. We'll invest $3 billion in renewable manufacturing and $20 billion to modernise and rebuild the electricity grid for what must be the coming renewable age. This is the future that we should be investing in, to be a renewable energy superpower. All we need is leadership and courage. Now, I know in these difficult times, I understand people are frustrated. I'm frustrated because we've had 9 long years of coalition government, of inaction and neglect. But the policies that I've just outlined and more will make a massive difference to our environment and to our climate. Can I do one more sentence? I've just got to say to you, 3 more years of Scott Morrison is 3 more years of selfishness. It's time for real action on climate, and a new Labor government will deliver that. Thank you.
For those opening remarks. It's clear just how vital this issue is from so many different dimensions that have been mentioned. And thank you, Benjamin, Tech Master. So we'll now move on to the question portion of the evening. The organisers, as I mentioned, many of you have submitted, thank you very much. Many of you submitted questions when you registered. We are also receiving some questions through the Facebook live feed on the Climate Action Moreland Facebook page currently as well, which is why I've got all these screens happening here. So how this is going to work, the organisers have sorted through the questions, pulled them together and have come up with a great variety of questions from you all for me to put forward to the candidates this evening. Some of you have identified a particular 1 or 2 or multiple candidates you'd like to hear from. In those cases, we'll ask the question to those candidates. In the cases where you haven't specified we'll make sure the candidates get a good chance to answer different questions. We are really aiming to give all the candidates a chance to have a good say on a variety of different issues. It will be tough. We've got only 1 minute per candidate to answer each question with a 45-second warning. So let's begin. If I do call out your name as the person who's asked the question, feel free to give us a wave so the candidates can direct the response to you. So first up, we have a question on environment and biodiversity. This is a question from Jen from Brunswick East. Jen from Brunswick East, thank you. Nice big wave in the middle there, welcome. Good to see you here. So Jen's question, climate change, energy and environment are interconnected issues, which a number of you have mentioned. You cannot address climate change without preserving the environment and biodiversity. How will you ensure close collaboration between these areas? We'll start off with Sue Bolton, please.
I'm meant to be sitting down and sorry.
It's okay.
Sorry about that. Well, firstly, I think biodiversity has to be acted on a number of different levels. From looking at from the whole question of agribusiness and agribusiness pushing toxic poisons, etc., onto farmers and even backyard gardeners, which destroy the insects, and including insects that are needed to control other pets, there's been a massive impact on biodiversity, and that's from that point of view. Then there's the question of the raising of, whether it be bushland in regional areas, whether it be building over bushland in cities. Oh, that's the end, is it? Oh no. And also the raising of local parks within urban settings, and that has an impact on diversity. So, as well as climate change, we have to act on those questions of saving and preserving green space and addressing the whole toxic issues of agribusiness.
Thank you, Sue. Khalil?
Thanks, Anna. I think the answer is local and national. I've announced already in this campaign a commitment to $5.5 million to restore the Moonee Ponds Creek, our urban waterways, the local flora and fauna, and connection to country with an educational program with Indigenous elders along the creek for the community to really link back in, as well as $500,000 for Merry Creek as well for works there. But at the national level, we've got policies that include 3,800 new Indigenous rangers, a vital role of restoration and preservation of the land and water across parks and lands across Australia. And at the national level too, we're committed to a new Federal Environment Protection and Diversity Act, strengthening the environmental approvals processes to bring them into the 21st century. So when projects, whatever the project might be, energy projects, go through those federal environmental approvals, the impact of those projects are looked at in the approvals process, the impacts on climate change, on water, on the environment. And that's very important because the current framework is quite weak and it needs to be strengthened. These are things that we've committed to.
Thank you, Peter. We now have a question on transport. So Lisa from Moreland Bicycle Users Group. Hello Lisa, up the back, welcome. Lisa's question, we hear a lot about electric vehicles despite Australia being a global laggard in this space, but space in our cities is as finite as fossil fuels. We need more people riding and walking, even if it's more about short local trips. Active transport has wide-ranging social and environmental benefits. If elected, what improvements will you lobby for to allow more people in Wells of all ages and abilities to ride and walk safely and make active transport a realistic option for more of our residents? Emma, can we start with you, please?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. I think town planning, city planning should be something that ordinary people have control over. The electric cars is a ridiculous kind of alternative at this point in time with the crisis that we're facing. It's It would be incredibly wasteful to just produce a whole bunch of new electric cars. You need the lithium mining involved is just like extreme. We don't even know if we have the resources for it. And the biggest beneficiary is going to be Elon Musk, as far as I can tell. A much better alternative is to have cities which are organised in interests of ordinary people, and transport systems that are like sustainable and renewable, and yeah, like won't contribute to the further destruction of the climate in the interest of making money.
Thank you. We'll now have Sarah, please, to answer that question.
That is a really good question. My partner has been a cyclist for many years. I'm what you might call a baby cyclist. I learnt to ride a bike in Alice Springs where we didn't need bike paths because everyone just rode bikes everywhere. But I have often looked at the clock and watched and waited for my partner to come home safely from riding his bike. Bike safety is a really big issue. I live up near Melville Road where there was a tragic accident only 2 weeks ago. Look, the Greens are really strong on wanting more bike infrastructure and bike safety for active moving, walking and cycling around, and that's something we're really passionate about. More people on bikes, more people out of cars. I think that's the focus, and that's where we would be putting infrastructure if we had the opportunity.
Thank you, Sarah. Next, we have a question about gas as a transition fuel. This is from Norrian of the Socialist Alliance. Hello, welcome. All you question askers at the back. All the cool kids at the back asking the questions. Very good. Welcome, Norrian. Your question: as natural gas produces significant greenhouse gases during its use, extraction and production, what is your policy on the use of natural gas, a fossil fuel, in the transition to a renewable energy economy? Leah, can we please start with you?
So thank you. This might be quite a quick answer. It's basically to remove support for the industry and support phasing it out, and instead support clean options for energy. So yeah, I think that's pretty much the Animal Justice Party's policy on natural gas.
Thank you very much, and we'll go to Sarah again, please.
I think if it's in the ground, it can stay there. If you don't have a plan to get off fossil fuels, then you don't have a plan to tackle the climate emergency. And that's what we need to be doing.
Thank you.
Do I get to, no?
Oh, we're going to go to another question that we're going to start with you, actually. We have a question on integrity. So this is a question from the Coburg Uniting Church. We'll ask this of all candidates. How would you ensure that corruption in government is held to account by an independent anti-corruption commission with teeth?
Good question. Well, thank you. Thank you for that question. We have seen, as I said, 9 years of a coalition government, Morrison, Abbott, Turnbull, which is marked by corruption, sports rorts, pork barrelling, the whole lot. We have announced many years ago, actually, while we've been in opposition, a federal ICAC with teeth that will actually tackle this. It's a very, very complex set of legislation. We will deliver that if we are elected to government, to actually bring integrity back into our democracy and into our parliament. That's been on the books. We don't have time to go through all the details of it now, but I welcome you to have a look at our federal ICAC policy and the fact that our leader, Anthony Albanese, is absolutely committed to legislating that federal ICAC if we form government.
Thank you, Peter. Emma? Would you like me to repeat the question?
Sure. Oh no, I think I'll be okay. Like, yeah, obviously, personally, I think most career politicians and parliamentarians, you know, are pretty corrupt in a lot of ways. I'd like to see that. I'd like to see whatever reforms, you know, are possible to sort of have an impact. I'd also like to see more action around misogyny and yeah, other issues that are plaguing, you know, the culture in Parliament. But yeah, the ICAC obviously is very overdue. I don't know if it'll fix everything, but it'll be a good reform.
Thank you. Sue?
Well, a Socialist Alliance would certainly support an anti-corruption commission of some kind, hopefully with teeth. But for that to work, you also need whistleblower protection. And at the moment, workers who blow the whistle come under huge pressure and often lose their jobs. But also, I think anti-corruption commissions, whistleblower protection, and maybe some other legal measures aren't enough by themselves. You actually, to really force politicians to be accountable, you also need grassroots community campaigns and trade union campaigns to actually fight to expose what's going on and fight for people's rights. Because in my experience, just relying purely on legal measures through whether it's Parliament or Council isn't sufficient to really protect people. You actually need a lot more than just those legal measures.
Thank you, Sue. And Leah.
I'm so sorry. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. There it goes again. No, I think that'll be okay around the glass. So yeah, this is a fantastic question, thank you. Having worked in a number of developing countries around the world that are unfortunately far more corrupt than Australia is, I've seen firsthand how corrosive it is across all aspects of society, so it's something I'm very passionate about. I think that if you want to know what people value, you need to look at the budget. When you want to know what governments value, look at their budget, what they're spending money on. So I think that if you value anti-corruption, then you have to spend on it, and yeah, fully support a anti-corruption commission. I think as well as those steps, you know, proper penalties for corruption, taking it seriously, having people who can regulate it, who have actual teeth and power, you need to look at prevention as well. So I think it's very important to look at strengthening the institutions of state that can prevent corruption. So genuine support for free media, genuine support for community groups to hold politicians to account, and even in our education system, so civics education, so from a young age people are understanding their role in holding the government to account, and also that if they one day run for Parliament or are elected, the duties and the serious responsibility of that. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for taking that question not on notice, given it's a climate forum, but very important issue nonetheless. Oh, sorry. Just go for it.
The Greens are going to the election on a platform of federal ICAC. I value honesty and integrity so very highly, and that's something I won't compromise on. We want a federal ICAC with teeth. We want integrity back in politics. We want to implement the recommendations of the Jenkins Review, which I'm very passionate about for everybody that's working in Parliament, but particularly for women. I noticed that the Jenkins Review had 200 mentions of alcohol for what's happening in Parliament when staffers are there and working. And I think we need to start from the bottom up, or start from the top up as it goes. We need to clean up politics, and a federal ICAC is the way to start that.
Apologies for skipping there. Next question is from Tom Knowles. Tom, are you in the house? Hello, Tom, welcome. Tom's question is on subsidies to fossil fuel industries. Very straightforward, so it might be a quick answer. Will you commit to ending taxpayer subsidies to the fossil fuel industries? Peter, let's start with you.
Thanks, Tom, for your question. So let's just be really clear about this. Labor has very clearly stated that we are not providing any federal taxpayer money or subsidies for coal, unlike the Morrison government, which is actually investing in coal-fired power plants. And we are committed to renewable energy. That's what we're investing in. $24 billion, $3 billion in renewable energy manufacturing, $20 billion in modernising the electricity grid to allow the renewable energy that we have to work on the grid so that we can take it up and unlock the potential of renewable energy, which is in such abundance in this country. Now, this is already happening. The transition is happening. We're going to invest massively, including our modelling shows another $52 billion that will flow through into renewable energy and renewable energy manufacturing. That's our commitment. That's what we believe in, and we'll deliver it if we form government.
Thank you. Sarah, we'll go to you. Yes, certainly. Will you commit to ending taxpayer subsidies to the fossil fuel industries?
Yes. I mean, that's really it. It's yes. The answer is yes. I know that billions of dollars subsidising fossil fuel companies. That's more than we spend on public education. That it's got to stop.
Thank you. Leah?
Oh, okay, thank you. Thank you, Tom. Yes, a similar answer. Yes, the Animal Justice Party is committed to ending subsidies to fossil fuel and phasing out them as an industry entirely over time. I will also take my 45 seconds left to mention that in addition, as I mentioned, we're interested in phasing out subsidies to animal agriculture because it's so damaging for the environment as well. And I talked before about the emissions from animal agriculture, but also when you look at land use and the productivity and the bang for buck you get from animal agriculture as food, it just doesn't compare to plant-based agriculture. So with a growing population around the world, there's numerous reasons why we need to focus more on plant-based agriculture. So I can't remember what year the research was from, but if you're interested, I can get it for you. Found that to get 100 grams of beef is 30 times more greenhouse gas emissions than 100 grams of tofu. And even if you look at farmed fish, which is far less intensive in emissions than beef, it's still 3 times the emissions of tofu. And I remind everyone of the food pyramid we studied when we were in primary school. A plant-based diet is healthier and going to be an increasing necessity for everyone, whether you're vegan or not, in the future. And so that's another way that we're looking at reforming industry to reduce emissions. Thank you.
We absolutely have to phase out subsidies to fossil fuel companies, but all fossil fuel companies. It's not sufficient to do what Labor's proposing and just phase it out for coal. It's got to be coal, oil and gas. And in 2021, $10.3 billion was provided in subsidies to these companies, which equates to something like over $19,000 every minute of every day during 2020. So that's pretty staggering, and just imagine what we could do with that in terms of dealing with the issue of climate action, let alone other issues as well.
Yeah, tens of billions of dollars of taxpayer money subsidising billionaires in order to get the corporate backing. Pretty awful. I think, obviously, we should fight against that ever happening again. But also we should be not only cutting off subsidies, but taxing these companies. They're profiting off of the destruction of this climate, of the labour of mining workers, off the ancestral lands of Indigenous people. The money should be coming back into this community and should be funding, the rapid expansion of renewables so that we can actually, save our environment.
Thank you, Emma. We're almost an hour in, so I just think we can have a quick stretch. And while you're doing that, there's some lovely signs in the audience. Would you like to pop your signs up so our candidates can see what you have to say? Feel free to have a quick stretch before we continue on with some more questions. Yes, of course. Have a quick stretch if you like, just for a minute, and we will get back into it. Don't move too far though, it's a very quick stretch. Alrighty, let's get back into it. Yep. Sorry, I shouldn't have told you. Alrighty, let's get back into it. It was said it was a very quick stretch. It was a quick stretch. We've got a slightly more detailed topic for the next question. Thank you, everybody. From the fellow up front who is looking after our camera work, this comes from John Englart of Bolton. Thank you, Shushers. Very, very effective. Thank you. From Climate Action Moreland. So it's a long one, so that's why we had to have a break. We need to turn our listening ears on for this quite lengthy and detailed question, so let's see how we go. The UN Secretary General and the latest IPCC climate report identified reducing methane emissions as very important. Methane emissions come from agriculture, mining, transport and processing of coal and gas and waste landfill. The IEA, the International Energy Agency, reports that Australia's reported methane emissions are half its own estimates. Satellite reports of Glencore's metallurgical coal mines in the Bowen Basin show that methane emissions are being vastly underreported. What will your party do in boosting accurate measurements of methane emissions? And will you push for Australia to sign on to the Global Methane Pledge of at least 30% cut in methane emissions by 2030 that 110 countries have already signed? Peter, let's go to you.
Thanks for the question, John. Good to see you, and thanks for filming us. It's a very good question. I was actually looking at the policy on methane this week, and there are obviously technological advances that can be made. Some of it's around seaweed in livestock feed and so on to reduce methane emissions in the agricultural sector. But it's certainly one of the important things is the metrics around the measurements. And I know this government has been guilty of using the dodgy Kyoto credits, if you like, in their measurements for emissions and so on. We're very, very committed to making sure that we have accurate measures of the emissions that come from methane and agriculture, and a whole raft of policies. Again, I've only got 30 seconds, but if you look through our policies which we have announced and are public and are costed around reducing methane emissions in ag, in investing in technologies around reducing emissions in the agricultural sector. It's all there for you to see in black and white up on our website, and all of our policies are costed and detailed for everyone to have a look at.
Thank you, Peter. I'll go to you, Sarah, please.
I'm going to be honest, as a not climate scientist, a lot of this is very new to me. I've been learning about red seaweed in the last few days. So I would take a guess that the Greens probably would sign up to the methane pledge that was mentioned. I don't think that's going to be controversial for us. I think that we're committed to all of those things. I think we're committed to supporting people to eat less meat and for sustainable agriculture, and we would be doing anything to reduce our emissions wherever they come from.
Thank you, Sarah. And we'll go to Leah. Thanks.
Thank you, John. That's like a Dorothy Dixit for me, so I appreciate that, since you asked. Yes, absolutely. I think it's, people talk about the elephant in the room, we call it the cow in the room in the Animal Justice Party. So yeah, absolutely committed to signing on to the Global Methane Pledge. And in terms of practical steps to support moving more from animal agriculture to plant-based agriculture, I think it's not rocket science, it's just sort of looking at incentives and disincentives, and getting behind the shift that's already happening. Plant-based agriculture is a huge industry, employs a lot of people. I wish I'd written it down, but I was just reading the other day that horticulture in Australia employs more people than chicken, pork and dairy industries combined. So, there's plenty of jobs in this field, and we just need to get behind it and phase out that support for the animal agriculture that's producing these insanely high methane emissions. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Emma, would you like to add?
Well, firstly, self-reporting of emissions of any kind can't be trusted. And that's what happened in the European carbon trading scheme, is companies underreported what they were actually admitting. And it doesn't matter whether it's food safety or carbon emissions or anything else, you can't trust corporations to self-report. So that would be the first thing. That actually is shocking that is not something that is done by the government. It should be done by the government, not by corporations. But then there are also other issues. I mean, certainly Socialist Alliance would definitely support signing on to the Global Methane Pledge. And there are, as John mentioned in the question, a range of areas where, which produce methane from coal seam gas to animal agriculture. But I guess the question with animal agriculture, the shifting away from animal agriculture to plant-based agriculture, The problem is modern capitalist methods of agriculture are damaging whether it's animal or plant-based agriculture. And I think we need to shift away to more sustainable forms of agriculture. Yeah.
Thank you. Would you like to?
Yeah, I really agree with Sue on that. You know, like it's kind of ridiculous that this loophole around methane emissions is only now just being acknowledged. But, you know, you look at the beef industry and lots of agriculture in Australia is incredibly unsustainable. You know, the irrigation that's required to, like, even, you know, have cows across this country is just ridiculous. My dad, you know, used to go and bail out farmers all the time in regional Queensland. So yeah, I just think, you know, the only way to make agriculture more sustainable is to turn it into an industry that's not for profits, but is actually for people.
Thank you. And one that follows up really tied to that question is dealing with vested interests from Anonymous, probably not the internet hacking group, but somebody who did not submit their name. How will you deal with vested interests in the sectors of agriculture, mining and the trade union movement so as not to be constrained in your efforts to effectively prevent global warming? Emma, would you like to answer?
Sorry, can you just repeat the first part again?
Yeah, sure. How will you deal with vested interests in the sectors of agriculture, mining and the trade union movement so as not to be constrained in your efforts to effectively prevent global warming?
Well, I don't think anyone within the agricultural or mining industry would have the vested interests in supporting me as a candidate. And I'm involved in the union movement as like a union delegate and organiser, but they've never given us money. They do the whole labour thing.
Sue, would you like to answer?
Well, did I understand you talking about fossil vested interests of fossil fuel companies in manipulating policy? Is that what you're talking about?
It says specifically, I'll repeat the question again, how will you deal with vested interests in the sectors of agriculture, mining and the trade union movement?
Okay. Well, I think how you deal with the issue of vested interests is that you can't resolve the issue of climate action by relying on the market, because we've seen 30 years, in my knowledge, that's when I became aware of climate change in the late 80s, and the market hasn't solved the issue. All that's happened is vested interests have blocked action on dealing with climate change in all sorts of spheres. So if the market worked, we would have dealt with the issue of climate change by now. So that is why I put forward the proposal for the energy industry to be taken back into public hands. And I'd say major transport industry should also be in public hands so that it can be run in the interests of a fossil-free society. Those are just two things that would start to deal with the question of vested interests. While it's in the hands of the market, we're always going to have vested interests influencing things, either fossil fuel capitalists or else Elon Musk, who wants us to buy his poisonous lithium battery instead of environmentally sustainable batteries. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Sue. And Leah.
Thank you. Yeah, my answer is a little bit like Emma's to begin with, which is big ag, big mining and the trade unions aren't really interested in influencing the Animal Justice Party at the moment, maybe one day if we're more powerful. But so I'll take the question more broadly in terms of vested interest in politics, and I think that saying about sunshine being the best disinfectant is really an important one. So I think simply more transparency about where all political parties get their funding from is good for everyone in our community, and that's something that I'm fully behind.
Thank you, Leah. Sarah?
The Greens don't accept any donations from big corporations or fossil fuel companies. None of them have donated to my campaign. I can't think why. And we would be looking at ending donations to political parties from big corporations and fossil fuel companies anyway. And I agree, sunshine is a good cure for corruption. And I think airing those interests is really important. Transparency is really important.
Thank you. Peter?
Thanks. Absolutely agree on transparency. And actually, Federal Labor is committed to strengthening our democracy. We had 2 bills before the 46th Parliament to reduce or lower the federal disclosure of donations from the current 14,500 to a fixed 1,000 and require donations to be disclosed within 7 days. Surprise, surprise, the Liberals didn't accept that. And I should also point out we unilaterally banned foreign donations as well. And there's a long and proud history of this. It was actually Bob Hawke that first introduced political donations disclosure regime and had set it at 1,000. The Liberals, when they got back into government, put it back up to 10,000, and with inflation it's gone up to 14.5. But I mean, this is a partisan debate. So, I've taken a few hits here and, I've heard from the other candidates. But the Greens themselves take money from a millionaire that makes money out of gambling. All right? So, you need to actually be really clear and consistent about your principles on these things and be open about them. It's easy to take hits at your opponent, but there's a high-rolling gambler that's donated some $500,000 to the Greens based on, and this is a party that says that they're against the gambling industry. So we need to be clear about that as well.
All right, we've only got a few more moments left, so I'm going to ask 2 questions of Sarah and Peter to wrap up the question time. These questions were asked commonly by audience members, so they're very important. So the 2 questions are, given climate change is a threat multiplier, and so we will see millions more refugees in the world, what will you do to stop Australia from continuing indefinite detention of people seeking asylum? And the second question is an environmental question. It's quite a lengthy one, so I hope you have a pen if you want to take some... Okay, sure. Let's take the first question first, the refugee question. Sarah, if you want to start us off.
Yeah, there you go. Sarah or me?
Oh, sorry, Peter, you
Okay.
go.
Thanks so much, and thank you for that question. I'm very passionate about this issue. I've worked tirelessly in this national policy space around developing our policy, and we've committed to ending indefinite detention on Manus and Nauru. We've committed to, if we form government, to doubling our refugee intake, including an additional 5,000 on top of that, doubling through a community sponsorship program. We've committed to the UNHCR, funding for the UNHCR around helping the resettlement of the millions of registered refugees under the UNHCR across the region. We've committed to ending TPVs and Chevs, that cruel, unnecessary policy of temporary protection visas on people who are already found to be genuine refugees. But more than that, I've worked on policy in this area. You're welcome to have a look at the Saturday paper article and essay that I've wrote and a speech that I've given at Deakin Uni around the need for us in government, a Labor government, to actually work towards a multilateral agreement to increase the refugee intake across multiple countries across the region. Because while we can double our intake, we need to get other countries working. There are 25 million refugees registered as refugees with the UNHCR. This requires a Labor government, with Penny Wong as the Foreign Minister and me helping her and working on the policy and pushing her on the policy that I've worked on, to actually make a real difference globally. And we've committed funding to the UNHCR. Penny just made some announcements too today on climate refugees with respect to the Pacific, and it's part of our policy outline, again fully detailed and costed on our website, around support for relocation of our Pacific Island brothers and sisters as the impact of climate change hits their front door. And that's what we're going to do if we win government.
Thank you, Peter. And Sarah, thank you.
When I was studying law, I did a unit on human rights law, and at the time it was around the 2004 election. There was a lot of talk about refugees, and I studied human rights law and looked at the policies of the parties and came to the Greens because of Labor's policy on refugees. There was a tweet the other day from the ALP that I thought was a parody, because it says, "We will stop the boats." I just don't understand how we can justify refugee policy that is inhumane and still maintain that it's within human rights law. That's why I'm with the Greens, to be honest. People are entitled to fair processing of their application for refugee status. And I think, unfortunately, we've become a country that puts people in boxes with little windows for 9 years on end and does nothing with them. And I think we're better than that. I think we are a big country with a lot of space, and we can welcome people who need asylum. And I'm a human rights lawyer first and foremost, and that's why I'm with the Greens.
Thanks, Sarah.
Can I make a response to
We'll
that?
wrap it into your next question.
As a debate point? Can I make a
You
quick
can wrap it
response?
into your next question. Yeah, thank you. We haven't allowed that so far. I'm sorry.
Oh,
We'll
happy
just
to ask
keep
a
consistent with that. Thank you. We've only got time for one more question. I'm sorry. We have a lot of forest lovers in the room. I can see your lovely hearts here. I enjoyed some time in Warburton over the weekend, so this question is very pertinent. Victoria's native tall wet mountain ash forests are the most carbon dense forests in the world. Unbelievably, with legal exemption, they are still being logged to make Nippon opal cardboard. This increases fire risk and severity, reduces our healthy water sources, increases emissions, as well as destroying the habitat of many unique threatened species, such as greater gliders and leadbeater's possums. Question is, will your party strengthen Australia's environment laws with binding national standards that apply to all industries, including the native forest logging industry? Please reference the EPBC Act and how you would work on this with state governments. Sarah, I'll go back to you, please. Yep. Will your party strengthen Australia's environment laws with binding national standards that apply to all industries, including the native forest logging industry? Please reference the EPBC Act and how you would work on this with state governments.
I'd have to, because I'm not completely across it, I would say that we probably would support binding national standards for protecting forests, but I can't reference the particular parts of the Act. I'm happy to have a further chat afterwards, and actually Tim Reid is here as well. He's probably more informed on that than me. But yes, I think generally we would support forests and not deforestation for all the reasons that are listed. I'm sorry that's not a more comprehensive response, but I'm just not across it.
Thank you, and Peter, we'll go to you to round it up.
Thanks. Labor's policy to implement, and it's there for you all to see, a very comprehensive plan to work with state, territory and local governments, as well as landholders, to achieve a net increase in Australia's vegetation cover and create a carbon sink. So this will have an added benefit of reducing Australia's emissions and contribution, obviously, to climate change. The plan, and you can all have a look at the detail, but the plan very quickly includes improvements to management and an end to broad-scale clearing by providing conditional funding. And Federal Labor is also going to implement a best practice national vegetation mapping and monitoring program to support these aims, consulting stakeholders throughout, and particularly traditional owners. Now, as I said, I'm not going to respond to the other point, but there are a lot of policies that are detailed and costed. I've been working on these for years, and so has our team, because we're a party that can actually form government, and we actually care about the detail of policies and how they're costed and how they will be implemented through the mechanisms of government. That matters, because that's what makes the real change and the real action on climate change.
Thank you for all your responses, candidates. That concludes the question and answer section of this evening. So we've got one more element of the evening, which is a wrap-up moment for each candidate. So each of our candidates will have 1 minute to sum up what they'd like to share with you tonight. We'll return to the alphabetical order. So Emma Black from Victorian Socialists. 1 minute with a warning bell at 45 seconds. Thank you.
Well, I think it's important to acknowledge that the Labor Party are the architects of the barbaric offshore detention system in this country, and have overseen the ongoing humiliation and barbaric imprisonment of innocent and sick refugees in hotels in this city for 2 years. You tell me you care about refugees and you're passionate and you're working on policy. We were there every Friday night campaigning for those men to be freed. I didn't see you there, Peter. Also, it's nice that Sarah has studied human rights law and the Greens have a good policy on refugees, but our Senate candidate is a Tamil refugee from Sri Lanka. He was in Villawood detention and he's been campaigning for refugees ever since.
Thank you. I'm Sue Bolton from the Socialist Alliance.
The world will eventually be forced off fossil fuel, but if we rely on the market as the way to do it, it'll be far slower and it will totally dislocate communities, because it'll be like when Hazelwood closed down with no plan for alternative jobs and for how that community would survive. And so that's why Socialist Alliance believes we actually need the transition to be run by public enterprises and remove the whole issue of the profit motive and vested interests. It needs to be run by public enterprises so that we can move fast to get to 100% renewable energy and guarantee alternative jobs for workers. But also, I think we're not only going to be able to do this just through the elections, we also need to step up in terms of a grassroots climate movement. And that means involving, all parts of society that want action on climate change, including workers and unions. Because it's really, if you look at the whole last 100 years of Australia's history, any important social reform has only ever been won as a result of strong grassroots action where people join together in solidarity.
Thank you, Sue. Leah Horsefall from National Justice Party.
Thank you. I've decided to use my last minute to talk about some more hopeful things. I think we've covered a lot of heavy issues tonight. It can be quite daunting talking about the climate crisis. So I just wanted to talk quickly about some of the successes that the Animal Justice Party has been able to achieve in the places where we do have elected representatives in New South Wales and Victoria. So some of the wins that we've had in Victoria, we've been able to get pets defined as family members in the Family Violence Protection Act, which makes a massive difference because they are often used as a pawn in family violence situations. And we've also secured more funding for pet-friendly crisis accommodation so that someone fleeing family violence doesn't have to make an impossible choice to leave their companion animal behind. You might not believe it, but there was a legal loophole in Victoria that wombats could be shot recreationally, and having an Animal Justice Party member in the Victorian Parliament quickly closed that loophole, so that is not possible anymore in any part of Victoria. In New South Wales, we've confirmed the end of the use of dolphins and whales in entertainment, which we were very proud of, and a lot of work on animal abuse, so mandatory lifetime bans on owning animals for people who have abused animals, an 8-fold increase on penalties for animal abuse, and you can't get a working with children check cleared in New South Wales anymore if you have a history of animal abuse. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah. Sarah Jefford, Australian Greens.
I think we've proven that having the Greens in the lower house does make a difference. We've got dental into Medicare for children because of the Greens. It's only because Adam Band is in Parliament that I know that there's 114 new coal and gas projects, because the Labor and Liberal Party don't tell us about that, but the Greens do. I think you should vote with your values. I vote with my values. My vote doesn't belong to anybody. I think the idea that you should only vote for the party who might form government denies that we live in a democracy and that all of our votes are valuable. I think it's appropriate perhaps to finish on a more positive note that being ambitious and courageous is actually what we should be valuing, rather than accepting second-rate policies just because that's what people have done in the past. We can have more Greens in the lower house, we can have more minor parties and independents in the lower house and in the Senate, and I think we've proven that when we have them, we can make real change, and that's what the Greens would do if we had the seat of wills. Thank you.
Khalil, Australian Labor Party.
Thank you. I said at the start of the night that the one thing we share all in common is that we care, and that's certainly true. We all care at this table, all of you care about making positive change that makes a difference to your lives and to the country and our place in the world. But the difference is that we disagree on some of the ways to get there. Now, Emma, it's a partisan debate. You had a crack, fair enough. I'll tell you what I was doing on a Friday night and a Saturday night and a Sunday night for years. I was actually talking to refugees and asylum seekers and their families. My team and I were trying to help them get their visas changed. I sucked it up and talked to the minister because I was in opposition to try and get a result for those people. I didn't make a song and dance about it. We've helped hundreds of people hundreds of refugees and asylum seekers. Even outside of my electorate, I get calls from Perth, and I do that work because that's part of my commitment to the community and part of my commitment to the national policy. And if you vote for me, you will get a local MP in a Labor government that will make changes that make a difference to your lives on climate change, tens of thousands of lives on refugee policy, and on Aboriginal reconciliation, and so much more, because we will change this country. When you change the government, you change the country, and I'll be there right next to the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister making it happen. Thank you very much for coming tonight.
Thank you all our candidates. I'm full of admiration for you stepping up and wanting to represent this amazing community. So thank you all for taking the time to be involved in the public debate and discussion, and for giving this audience here and the community beyond so many people to choose from as their next candidate in Wills. Thank you very much for being here and preparing. Please join me in thanking all the candidates. And I do also want to thank all of you for showing up here tonight, for taking the time out of your evening to show that you really care about climate in this election. Those here in present and joining online, thank you very much. And if I could ask one thing of you, it's that you bring others into this conversation with you. I know, I can see from the flags and signs that you do this already. I'm sure you're really connected and passionate, but please do take the time to share this conversation we've had tonight with your friends and family in the area and make climate the #1 issue in this election. Ron, I'll hand over to you to wrap up. Thank you.
Thanks, Anna. Well, you've been very patient. You'll be pleased to know that the Bible says, "Put not your trust in princes or in princesses." So we've been testing that to see who we can trust, what policies, and your questions have been outstanding. I'd like to thank you again for your presence here. We have particular thank yous for Nerida of the Neighbours United for Climate Action. They're picking the flowers as I speak. Thank you so much. And I hope you'll check out these organisations. Check them out and see what sort of important, significant work they do. Climate Action Moreland is represented tonight by Andrea. A big thank you to Andrea from Climate Action Moreland. Down there she is. We're just going to throw you the flowers if that's okay. Didn't think you'd mind. Thank you so much, Andrea. We've got some flowers here for you. And a little way of saying thank you from Coburg Uniting Church on behalf of Meet the Candidates. We're picking those flowers now. Thanks, Ian. And here they come. Thank you so much for helping us organise this. Well done. They are coming down eventually, thanks Ian. Alicia from Socialists, who was singing at the beginning, thank you so much, Alicia. She's just in the kitchen there if you want to come on down. And Andrea. So we have one for Andrea and one for Alicia. Thank you, Benjamin. Alicia, thank you so much. And last but not least, yes, thank you so much. We're trying to work out who gets the posies and who gets the roses and so on. Last but not least, Anna Crabb, the Australian Energy Foundation. So good. check them all out, look at their organisations. So thank you so much, Anna, for your outstanding work, and all of our fine candidates for your outstanding, excellent responses. It just reminds me to say to you, join us for some refreshments, coffee and tea. In America, we say vote early and vote often. But we hope you join us for coffee and tea, and I bid you a very pleasant good evening.